get this. Bounding boxes. So we're going to start with the front artboard being the one that's selected. So just check your artboards. Number 1 front should be the one that we're working on. And we're going to zoom out until we see that there is a graphic directly underneath it that matches that same size. So we have this graphic right below here that should come up and be on this artboard, and there's lots of ways that we can get it up there. Precision, dragging, but using actual coordinates is a good way of doing it. So with our selection tool, we're going to select this group below here called Windy Conditions, and notice that it has been grouped. So everything is coming together as one piece. Move your cursor over the upper left corner. Don't do it, but if you were to drag it, don't do it, it's going to resize, right? That's the behavior that we expect to see. For the moment, we're going to change things. We're going to say View on the drop-down up here, and then we're going to say Hide the bounding box. It's about halfway down. And we're going to click that. Now notice the bounding box has gone away, and what we basically see are all the anchor points that create the shapes that have the fills in them. We can see that the letters aren't actual fonts. They've been outlined as well with a bunch of anchor points. So the bounding box is hidden, which also makes it so that we can't resize it. So going to an anchor or a corner point, I no longer could drag it and make it a different size. We're going to move our cursor to the upper left point, and by clicking and dragging on it, we're going to just basically bring it up, and we're going to snap it to this artboard above here. Had we not turned off that bounding box, clicking on that upper left point would have transformed it, would have made it a whole different size. So now that we have it where we want it, we can go back to showing the bounding box. So under Window, that's not where it is. Under View, Show Bounding Box. Shift Command B. So now we're back to having a bounding box with our grouped items inside of it. So that's one way that we could move content. We can also do it using the Properties panel, actually knowing X and Y coordinates or setting them up ahead of time. View everything in the window. Command Option 0. And click on the blank artboard over on the right that's empty. That made it the active artboard. I can see up here artboard 3 is active, and there is that dark line around it that's kind of hard to see. And you need to be zoomed out enough to see the shape below it. So zoom out and or scroll down a little to see that shape. And with our selection tool, we're going to click to select that shape with the windmill logo on it. And then in our Properties panel up here in the Transform section, we're going to change our reference point. So the first thing we did was make sure that artboard 3 was our active artboard, this one right here. So right now, everything is being, it's being referenced from the dead center of this artboard. We want to change the reference point. So in this like tic-tac-toe square over here, we want to click on the upper left square so that that is the one that's highlighted. And that's going to make our reference point be the top point. We also want to change our X and Y values to both be 0 right here. And when we did that, the selected artwork went up to the 0, 0 point of our targeted artboard. So it pulled it up there and perfectly positioned it. Does that make sense? Artboard 3, we told it to have its reference point be the top left corner. And then the selected artwork that we had down here, we told it to go to the 0, 0 point, which is this top left corner, and it popped right up there. Okay, click to deselect that and do a file save. We now have 3 artboards with content in them, and then we have some miscellaneous artwork down here that we're going to be working with. Scaling objects. First thing we're going to do is do some scaling, and we need to be able to see the dude in the raincoat down here. So zoom in on Mr. Raincoat. With your selection tool, I want you to select him. And can anybody see anything unique about this if you look at the shapes inside here? Or something that's not like the rest?
Made up of lines,
What is?
like his arms.
His arms, yeah. Everything else is shapes. His arms are lines. So let's, if we look at the outline view, we see that we have all these shapes, but his arms are just these skinny lines. So do you remember when we had strokes? It's just a line with a stroke, but it's got a really thick stroke on it, and because of that, it looks like a thick shape. But it isn't. Everything is shapes except for his arms. They are actually lines, and that's important because we're going to see how that misbehaves. All right, in our properties panel, we're going to go back to our center reference point. So reset your reference point to be the center square. Make sure that our constrained proportions lock is locked. So over here on the right, it should look like a chain link, not the one with the slash. Lock it down. And we're going to change the width and the height of our guy, but we don't really know numbers. We just know we want him to be 30% of what he is right now. And we can actually do that. So in the width, you can type in, highlight everything, including the inches, and type in 30 and then the percent sign. And then when you hit tab, the other one is automatically going to be 30%, but it's going to convert them both to their inches. So now what's going on with our guy?
Like a puff.
He looks like Popeye, right? With the big arms. So typically when we scale things, lines and strokes, or not lines, strokes don't get scaled unless you tell them to intentionally. And in this case, we most definitely do. To be honest, most of the time you want them to scale. If you had a box up here that was 6 inches by 6 inches, and to have a nice thick stroke on it, it had to be a 20-point stroke. And then you said, let's make that down to 20% of its original size. The box would get 20% of its original size, but the stroke would stay at 20 points and it would look ridiculous, right? So scaling the stroke to match whatever's going on is usually a good thing. So we're going to undo and not make him be Popeye. So what we need to do is tell it to scale strokes and effects before we do that. So undo our scale, we did that. In our properties panel, in the transform section, we're going to the 3 dots that show more information. So click on that and looky there, scale corners, scale strokes and effects. Turn on scale strokes and effects. And then within this pop-up window, because it's the same thing, as long as our constraints are locked here, we can change the width to be 30% and hit tab. And height also went down to 30%. Notice that the arms, I'm going to click away, they scaled correctly this time. The guy's a lot smaller. His arms are not huge.
Just change the width.
With him selected, go into that more in the transform, make sure that the scale is selected, and then in the width, highlight everything including the inches and type in 30% and hit tab. And that's going to also make the height 30% because it's locked. Yep. Yep. Hold down your space bar so that you get the hand tool and just shuffle over here to, well, you're moving to the left to where the flower is. We want to be able to see the flower next. And with our selection tool, click to select this flower. And we are now going to find the scale tool, and it might be nested. It is. So the rotate tool is the one that looks like the circle arrow. It's underneath your type tool. nested underneath that, we have a bunch of different tools: scale, reflect, shear, and reshape. And we're going to be working with all of these today. We're going to choose the scale tool. So click on that. Notice that your tool changes and it looks like a little rectangle going up to a big one. A lot of these tools, if you double click on them in the toolbar, you can edit their behavior before you use them. So we're going to double click on the scale tool and we're going to get our options. So uniformly means if we say 30%, height and width are going to go together. If that's not your intent, you have to switch it to non-uniform and type them in how you want. We do want uniform, so make sure that is selected. The scale the stroke and effects is checked. That's good. And let's turn on our preview so that we can see what we're doing before we tell it to happen. And we're going to uniformly scale this to 20%. And then hit tab and you stay in that window, but you see your preview. So with the preview on and off, that's what 20% is going to look like. If you're happy with that, you say, okay. I need to zoom out a little bit so that I can see the artboard above it where we're going. And we're going to take our selection tool and we're going to take this flower that we just shrunk down and we're going to drag it up and we're going to put it next to the windmill up here. But we're going to have it so it's touching this lower line. So just move that flower up into this graphic above here. Shrunk down to 20%. You might need to zoom out a little so you can see more of the space around your windmill. We're going to take this flower and we're going to duplicate it and make a bunch more and put them around the windmill as well. And the easiest way to do that with your selection tool is to just hold one keyboard modifier. Anybody remember what it is when you move something? Option, yep. So option drag out a few more of these flowers and place them around the windmill. Doesn't really matter where they go. And then if you wanted it to look different, you can scale or transform those to make them look a little shorter than the other ones, whatever. But using that tool, we're quickly able to make a bunch of flowers and put them on the artboard. All right, we're now going to learn how to reflect an object. And when you do that, Illustrator is going to flip the object across its invisible either vertical or horizontal axis, whichever one you tell it. And when you reflect something, you can tell it to go to the other side, or you can say, make a copy that goes to the other side. So you keep the original one. There's two ways of doing it. Fit all in window. Command Option 0. And below the artboard, we have this curly green shape that we want to work on. So I'm going to take my zoom tool and I'm going to zoom in on that so I can see it. This is the piece that we're going to be working on. And then take your selection tool and select this curly line. It's kind of hard to tell in this dark background, but can you see that it's kind of transparent where it starts and then it gets darker? We're going to notice this a lot more when we put it on a white background. All right, so with this piece selected, we're going to make a copy of it. So we're going to do an edit copy, and then we're going to do, which is Command C, that's an easy one, and then we're going to do an edit paste in place. Not just a normal paste, but paste in place, right where it is. So it's perfectly stacked on top of the existing one. Now we're going to use that reflect tool, and it's nested in the scale tool that we were just working with. So go over there and choose the reflect tool. And the first thing we need to do is tell it where this invisible line, the axis is that we're going to be flipping it on. Right now, do you guys see this little crosshair that's kind of in the middle of the artwork? If there were a bounding box around this whole thing, that would be the middle of the rectangle. We want to click right below it on the line to make our anchor or our reflecting point be that actual straight line. So now if we told it to reflect horizontally or vertically, it's going to flip based on this. So it's either going to flip this way or that way. It's going to flip based on that point that we just set. So that's when you use this tool, that's the first thing you have to do is set your point if you're not happy with where it exists. And that middle of the road, middle of the box thing wasn't going to work for us. All right. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, with this artwork still selected, and keep in mind this is the copy that's on top of it, we're going to take our cursor, which is the reflect tool. It kind of still looks like the selection tool, but it is the reflect tool. We're going to take it off to the right of our artwork, and we're going to click and drag down clockwise. See how it's making that copy bend around that point? And to get it to hold perfect, we're going to hold down the Shift key, and we're going to get it to rotate. Whoops. Start rotating, Shift. Oh, you know what? This is just, it's going to work for you guys, but not for me because I have this bizarre thing going on here. So flip it so that it looks like that. So with your cursor off to the right, using the reflect, click and drag down. And if you hold the Shift key, it's going to keep it at 45-degree angles and you're going to get it perfectly matched up. Let go of your mouse, then the modifier key. Okay, switch back to our selection tool. Notice that we are just selecting this bottom piece right now. In our transform panel on the right, we're going to click on the 3 dots for more information. And we're going to turn off the scale, strokes, and effects. We don't necessarily want that to happen this time, so we're going to turn that off before we move on. And then we're going to go to the lower right point of this bounding box, and we're going to hold on to it and just drag away to make this lower piece bigger. So we're going to get something like that, an effect that looks like that, so that it's not a perfect mirror of it. Is this a copy? Did you have a copy for sure? Yep. Okay, so you have your wind gust kind of looking like this one. From here, we're going to take our selection tool and we're going to click and drag across all these shapes and group them together so that they are able to be moved as one. Then fit all in the window, Command Option 0, and you're going to be able to you have to see that piece below it, so if you need to zoom out or scroll down a little, go ahead and do that. We're going to drag this wind piece up into the top of our, whoops, take this, come on, evidently I didn't group them. We're going to take that piece and drag it up into our art, and then we're going to make a couple copies of it. So we're going to hold down Option, and we're going to not do that. going to select this, we're going to hold Option, and we're going to drag out some copies of it. So put a couple of those wind bursts up on your main artboard. From there, we're going to do a file save, and we're going to stop here and take our first break.